start off with James Belfer, whose company does what I think a lot of people are interested in, because they invest in films. I know some of them because, in fact, at least one of them was with a client of mine, and a film that's currently in release, as a matter of fact. And I'll ask him to tell us a little bit about what he does.
Sure. So, very quick history of how I became an investor. I had absolutely no investor experience whatsoever. I had a largely creative background working for different production companies or independent producers here or there, and was then given the opportunity to actually manage a small fund, with the caveat of, I wanted to learn more on-set experience. I wanted to get an understanding of what the investment landscape is like in independent film. Basically was saying my fund will be on the same learning curve that I was going to be on. And what I wanted to do in those early stages was diversify the investment strategy, look at equity investments, look at loan investments, see as many different types of projects as possible. And all of this was at 2009 when the industry was going through very, very, very rapid changes. More so in backtracking, where I think right now we are moving forward, given technologies, given a lot of other companies that are trying to do new innovative things for independent film in the past couple of years. But what I decided to do, based on my own experience investing in small, under $500,000 projects all the way to $16 million projects, what I found was that the smaller projects were working for some reason. And the easy answer to that is, well, if you have less financial exposure, you have less financial risk. But I felt there had to be something else going on there. And so what I decided to do was begin to study tech startups, seeing a lot of similarities between exactly what's going on in the independent film world and what happens in the tech industry with a $500,000 startup, a $300,000 startup, a $1.5 million startup. And what I began noticing, studying angel investors, studying super angels, and then eventually accelerator programs, is that by focusing on business development, these smaller companies could succeed and ultimately would be put on this high growth track where all of a sudden, a year later, 2 years later, they're able to close $3 million in a Series A or $6 million in a Series A, which is something that if you look at independent filmmakers, that's the track that people try to get. You make a $100,000 movie, then a $500,000 movie, then $1 million movie, and then you get thrown into the agency realm and you start to make $5, $10 million movies. So I became very fascinated with accelerator programs and the startup industry in general, and really wanted to figure out what is the best way to make small equity investments from angels work in the industry.
What do you mean by accelerator programs?
So accelerator programs, they've been around since about 2007 in the tech industry, internet and software companies. Over the past couple of years, they've began to expand into hardware, healthcare, retail, a couple other industries. We became the first one for film. We're modeled after a company called Techstars, which is based in Boulder, Colorado. Ultimately what it is, it's a business development program over a 3-month period where we give teams of producers seed financing, mentorship in order to help on both the macro level of setting up a company and on the micro level of what each individual project that company wants to create. We give perks and resources to help on the cost, and then we conclude the program with a big pitch day in front of a larger network of investors, industry professionals in both film and startups.
How many people do you handle at one time, do you support at one time?
So this year we ended up taking 8 teams of producers. And it was a mix of both traditional film production companies and companies that are doing a little bit more of a new media play, meaning they're looking to leverage technology on the internet. They're looking to build their own platform as part of ultimately the content they want to create, but more than just saying we want to create independent film content, just creating independent content in general.
And why did you pick the equity piece of the business as opposed to, say, the debt piece, which we'll get into with Michael in a moment?
ultimately, what I found through my experiences, and granted, this is 4 or 5 years worth of investor experience, and I went and got my MBA at NYU, so I'm still a very young investor. What I found with the films that I've worked on, the ones that had different tiers of financing, everyone who was in the top tiers were making back their money, and everyone who was equity was not. And it's very difficult.
So you decided to invest in equity.
Exactly. Exactly. But I, as an equity investor in some of those projects, and then in one case, I actually was one of the debt lenders, and we still didn't make our money back. What I ultimately found was that the reason why that was happening was because of the tiers, not because there was an equity position, or not because the equity position was too large or the film budget was too high. It was because the financial interests were misaligned. In the case where even when I was a loan position, the lender who was ahead of us, because there was an offer on the table for money upfront immediately, even though it wouldn't fully recoup that position, they said, we'd rather take money than try to figure out a way to distribute the film ourselves, control most of the rights, and try to hopefully make more money than what that offer is. And because that lender felt this is what we should do, that lender got to do exactly that.
So that's really interesting. So what you're saying, I guess, is that you shy away from projects where there are lenders who could control what goes on because they're going to eat your lunch.
Exactly. And looking at it from a perspective of, okay, on those projects, let's say we didn't get a loan for the pre-sales. We didn't get a loan for the tax incentive, and everything was structured as all equity. And even if I, as an investor, had to put in more financing as a result of that, I would have at least gotten a portion of my investment back from those sales that we had done, from that tax incentive that we'd gotten. And that would have just given me a perception of, okay, at least I made a little bit of money back. At that point then, if everything else had been delivered on the film, it was a great film, I had a great experience, all my expectations were met, with the exception of, not making my entire investment back, I still would feel a little bit better than if I had lost everything on the film.
So Michael, this I think brings us to you. You're the bad guy in this scenario. You're the lender.
Just want to know what James is going to have for lunch. Yeah, we focus. I had a different response to his same conversation internally of, the debt typically recoups, the equity is much more risky, and we sort of took the opposite path of, hey, let's try to take that less risky piece, and came into the business that way. I'm almost the exact opposite. Like, had no film or no creative experience, and really we look at who sort of the production team are, less so of what is the creative content. So it's really more, do we believe in the team that's come together to make this movie, can they steward this project through and sort of make a successful film, regardless of whether the content is, can they sort of deliver on what they're setting out to do? I think that's what we typically look for. On the debt side, I mean, our loans sort of vary size-wise and even budget-wise, but we're typically always in that debt space. And it's I would say for the most part, it's been a benefit to us, as we've typically what I consider on the safer side of the investment. We have had some films that have done very, very well, and the equity has sort of received multiples of their investment, and we sort of had a fixed return because that was what we are agreed to. So there is sort of downside to that side of it, but as not being driven purely by the creative content and not trying to get into the business just to be in the movie business, more to build an actual business. We've always sort of steered more on that conservative side.
How are first of all, if you could give us an idea of the sort of typical budgets or range of budgets of the films that you get involved with, and what is the capital structure of those films look like? Where does the money come from?
Sure. Budget-wise, probably ranges between, on the low end, $1 million, and on the high end, I don't know, 15 or 20. I'd say most of our films probably fall in the $3 to $8 million range. Depending on the structure, it can be just one equity investor and us doing some debt either against tax credits or some sales or some expected sales. And then as budgets grow larger, it'll typically be equity, usually a bank, and then us providing some type of non-bank debt.
And you lend against tax incentives or subsidies, is that right?
Yep, tax credits in the U.S. and internationally, as well as actual sales contracts and also some expected sales contracts. So if a person's making a film, they have engaged with an international sales agent, and that sales agent says, I expect to be able to sell this film for this amount of money, we'll typically loan some amount of that, even though there's no actual sales yet.
Now, in my experience in the lower budget film, you're talking about a film certainly under $1 million, and often a film in the $1 million to $2 million or even $3 million range. It's very difficult to do foreign sales because the foreign sales agents and the buyers are interested in names because they don't know what the film is. They're pre-buying it before the film has been made, so they have no particular confidence in how good the film is going to be. But they do know if Nick Cage is in the film, for example, and that enables them, to sell. Having stars who are recognizable and saleable in the foreign markets is something that you really don't get to unless you've got a film, typically it's several $1 million in budget. But I'm wondering the incentives, the rebates, things like that. New York, Louisiana, New Mexico, they're all over the country now. It strikes me that that's something that's probably more available to filmmakers, regardless of the scale of the film. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think depending on the state within the U.S. and what type of film it is, some film programs you can get a tax credit with budgets at a minimum of $50,000. Some states are higher, and some states have requirements based on a certain percentage of your film being shot there. But there are plenty of states where you can get probably 20%, 25% of your budget, even at budgets of $100,000 and up. We've often seen filmmakers on projects of that size don't even sort of think about that and don't even get it. And I think it's, depending on the budget, it may not make sense to loan against it, but as sort of James says, if you go to your equity investor and say, hey, I'm making this film for $300,000 or $400,000 and we're going to get $75,000 back at the end of it, it's sort of an incentive to them to make that investment because they know part of their investment is sort of covered by that tax credit.
Which is a really good point. I mean, the bigger budget films typically try to monetize the future of a film. They monetize the potential foreign sales. They monetize the tax benefits, things like that. When you're dealing with a film at the lower range, you can't monetize the expected revenues the same way you can with a bigger film. But if you're pitching to an equity investor, it's still important to go to that equity investor and do an analysis that says, we can't sell the foreign rights now, but assuming that this is a reasonably successful film, at least reasonably well received by critics, here is the typical kind of return that you can get selling it, territory by territory. And here is what we expect to get, as a rebate for making the film in New Mexico, so that the investor can do the math and decide how much he's really truly net at risk. Because you don't want him to just go and say, well, it's $1 million, maybe I'll get it back, maybe I won't. You really want him to be able to do the calculus that says the great likelihood is that I'm only 50% at risk. But if you take into account the likelihood of selling foreign, the money that we're going to get back on the rebates, and then even if we have no theatrical release, the kind of money that you can get through some kind of a digital release, digital sell-through and things like that, which you should also calculate, you can narrow and identify the risk to the equity investor. And that's one of the ways, together with obviously a pitch on a project that the investor finds interesting, that you're going to be able to get money.
Yeah, I think it's, just to continue on that point for a second too, I think it's really important as you guys are out raising money for your films, because to sort of include that, I don't want to put more work on your plate as a producer because you guys do so much already to get a film off the ground, but it shows a sort of care to your investor of, I am really worried about you guys, I want to get you back your money, I realize you're taking a lot of risk you may not fully recoup, but as James sort of said, like, I can give you back some pieces. If the film really does well and performs, maybe I can give you back everything. But I think it's those experiences where investor says, hey, I had fun, they got me some money back, they told me they're going to get a tax credit, they got the tax credit, okay, let's talk about your next project, which is, I think, ultimately where you guys want to go. And raising money is so hard in any industry. I think the film industry benefits a little bit if there's a sort of sex appeal, this cachet of investing in movies. But if you guys can start to build that investor base and use them over and over again instead of trying to raise a new one every time you make a film, it'll save so much time and frustration for you guys.
Incompetence does not sell.
It may the first time, but definitely not the second time.
Carol, on more of the producer side, and to the extent that you're looking at helping to fund or funding.
Yeah, I mean, I went to USC Film School because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I think my frustration has been, I know for a lot of people, is that they taught us how to make a film, they didn't tell us how to fund a film. And I think that that's something that I'll be pissed off at them for a long time about. But the thing is that you have to move into that space, because the thing is that people are not running around the streets with money, and if they are, they generally tend to be crazy. And then you'll end up like I was at the Hard Rock Cafe in Chicago, talking to some blonde about money that she sort of represented but didn't, and that kind of propelled me into realizing that I had to become more knowledgeable and about a whole different field that I didn't really want to study, but that I realized would be the only way that I could tell the stories or get the stories told that I wanted to do. I also helped found a foundation called the Black House Foundation, which is about increasing diversity. And because I worked with a lot of African American filmmakers, and the frustration is that people would always tell us that nobody wants to see these stories, they'll never sell overseas, there's no way that this will ever make any money. And so our thing was like, we're going to prove them wrong about this. So I think the thing for me is that there's been a lot of really good technical information, and I've worked under the $1 million range. And there are ways to attract talent. There are ways to get people on. I think the tax incentives are great. That's something that every one of you should know. You should know. First and foremost, that's the most important thing, I think, is that that as you go to investors, a few things. Make sure that you, as a production team, are aligned in what the vision is that you want, so that you don't get to the point where your primary equity investor wants to take all the money and leave everybody else behind. So you got to make sure that you guys know where you're taking your project and how you're going to recoup the money and how it's going back to your investors. Also, listen to your investors. I think there's a lot of people who would willingly get into investing, but you have to hear what their expectations are. Why are they doing it? Whether it be an angel investor or somebody who's really looking hard at what the numbers are, so that you can present a very methodical and well, thought out plan about how this film will make money. We just did a film in Mississippi where we availed ourselves of the tax credits. We had material that attracted Isaiah Washington and Monique. This is her first role after winning an Oscar. And that way we're taking a very small film and making sure that we're mitigating all the risk to the investor. And the investor, we found one equity investor who was willing to come on board because we did all of these things. We got talent, we pre-qualified for the tax credits. We have material that we think, it's a gay coming of age story, which, you might say like, well, who's going to, get that? But we think we've got an approach to it that will make it bigger. My previous experience, we did a gay black Sex in the City. And we thought no one would ever pick that up, but we were smart enough to do enough stuff to make it get picked up, and it was Logo's first show. So my thing is that while there's a lot of, hard facts about financing and things that make it, that might make it difficult. My thing is always, you have to be the foremost champion for your project, and keep your hope up, because I just went through another experience where we met some more crazy investors. You'll meet a lot of them, and the big thing you learn is that a red flag is a red flag is a red flag. And and if you see it, and you want to have the hope, because the only way your film's going to get made if you have that hope, and you continue to sell your project to people, and you are the first and foremost best person to do that. And I think part of the thing, when you guys look at producer teams, you guys are looking for people who have that passion, but that passion mixed with knowledge, and that they understand that filmmaking is a really tough game. I'm now trying to get what we're trying to do is get professional athletes to come into to do more financing, because I have stories about guys who sign a $6.3 million contract and will spend $3 million on jewelry. And I'm all like, well, let me tell you, for $3 million, what you could get, but it's making that conversion. Understand, It may not be as sexy, but ultimately it may be more, beneficial. But they've also all been burned, because I think the other thing too is that a lot of people look at equity and they forget that you have a fiduciary responsibility to this person, and that you, and I work with filmmakers all the time, and I'm just sitting there puzzled, like, you need to talk to your investor, you need to establish a relationship, you need to have a transparency about what's going on. If you run into problems, you have to man up and talk about them, and say, like, we went over a little bit here, we're going to have to do this, and just, establishing relationships so that you can go back, so that when you get to the point where you can get $1 million or $2 million from them, that they're going to want to do that. And the thing with the athletes is a lot of people have taken them for a ride, and so what we're trying to do is show them that there are responsible teams out there who can make movies, and and do so in a way that's looking at they're going to get their money back, because it's really easy once you get the money, that your whole goal becomes my improvement of my career. If I can get this film out, regardless of whether I pay anybody back, I can get my next deal, because sometimes if your content's so good, that's what's going to happen. But that ultimately does a disservice for everybody who's behind you. So that's my path has been one out of I guess sort of frustration and desperation, to just see the kind of stories that I want to see told that are more interesting, that are kind of maybe marginalized or something like that, to get those done, and to learn as much as possible. I applaud everybody for being in this room, because the information you get here is important, and there's just every chance you can get, knowing about 181. It is, isn't it? Yeah, okay, 181. You should know all about all the IRS tax laws and all the different ways that you can help your investor know that they're going to be secure, and that your main goal, besides making a great movie to the best of your ability, is to mitigate the loss of their money.
And that supports the whole community.
Yeah.
You don't burn out someone for all of us,
Amy, I see from your background that you've been involved with some higher budget movies, producing quite successful higher budget. What's your approach?
Well, I've been producing films for about 18 years of all budget ranges, from 100,000 to, I guess, 5 million. I guess that's sort of the range. And so I was going from film to film, and each time you finance a film, there's a different model. There's no formula. There's no way to go about it. It's the only common denominator is persistence. Sometimes it takes years and years and years to find the financing for a film, and sometimes it takes 48 hours. It's hard to know. But after about 2 years ago, I was thinking about like how I can move forward in the industry, find something a little more meaningful, and find a way to finance films more consistently. And I began working with a producing partner, Ann Hummel, and we started working on a business plan. Now we did not have our MBA. I came from a more creative producing background, and we just started going through it. And a former intern of mine graduated from Harvard Business School, and I said, "You have to write our business plan for us. You got to write your own business plan, and I'll be here and answer your questions." I was like, ah! So it was the best thing we ever did, and it helped us understand the model. It helped us really think hard about how we're financing films, and it gave us a lot more respect for investors. It took us 2 years. It was a pain in the ass, but we did it. And ultimately, when we gave the business plan to the business people at William Morris, who were friends of ours, they were like, "This is one of the best business plans we ever." And I was like, I graduated from business school, But the gist of our company, we launched in January. It's called Tangerine Entertainment. And what we decided to do is do something that built community and audience and a bigger mission without sort of putting a restraint on content. So we were looking at the statistics of women directors in the industry, particularly for narrative films. And for example, last year, only 9% of the films released were directed by women. The year before, maybe it was 7%. It was throughout the years, it's been consistent. So we decided to do a company that was for women directors. It would limit some of the people that I had been working with developing their projects. I had to get rid of some projects, but we felt that this was a model that we could go to women investors and help women invest in other women. And we've spent the bulk of this year. We made our first feature, which just premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, directed by Megan Griffiths. We financed probably 60% by women investors. At the same time, we've been partnering with various organizations to build community. We're doing a screening series at the Museum of Modern Art. We partnered with someone called Fandor to do something called Movie Night, which is a book club doing online screenings of films directed by women. We started something called the Juice Fund a month ago, which we're working with 10 regional film festivals, giving out $1,000 awards to first and second time women directors. Now we're working with all those programmers to program more films directed by women. And through all of this, we're building our fan base online and building our community, and we've gotten like tremendous support. And it's so far been a really successful model. But so it's appealing to investors on a sort of an agenda basis, I guess, and a do-gooder participant thing. But we don't have to make human rights films or something like that. We can do kung fu films directed by women or whatever. So that and also just keeping our budgets responsible and primarily financing through equity.
Well, that's very interesting. What you just heard is there's a real business plan. There's an orientation. There's a pitch. You're not going to make the same pitch to everybody, and it's somewhat narrow. But there's plenty of room there with that business plan, and it gives you a focus, and it gives you a way in to talking to an investor, and I think that's very valuable. And with time, if you're successful with this business plan, there's nothing that's going to prevent you from branching out either.
Correct.
And you're going to say, well, this is what we do 90% of the time, but this project is so great, we're doing it anyway. And once you develop some credibility. The other thing that I just struck me as Amy was talking was her conversation with her friend at Harvard Business School, when she went and said, will you do our business plan? And his advice was absolutely correct. You've got to do it yourself. There are all kinds of professionals around who you can pay or not pay, and will help and may provide you with valuable help. But the key lesson in this business is that essentially you have to do things for yourself. People are constantly coming to me asking me to help do something, by which they really are saying, will you do it for me? First of all, I don't have an incentive to do it for them. No one really can pay me the amount that it would take to do the work necessary to launch a film company or even to launch a film. It's a tremendous investment that has to be made, and no one is going to get the benefit of it the way you do, and no one has the interest in doing it the way you have. So you've really got to do it yourself. And if you start looking around for people who are going to do it for you, you're likely to waste a lot of time.
I thought it was really interesting hearing both these women speak to how they sort of targeted like their own niche of investors, right? Like professional athletes and women, but still in a manner that allowed them to make the kind of films that they wanted to make. Like you said, you could make a kung fu movie directed by a woman. That's, to me, really smart, because it's like there's a tremendous amount of very successful women who would love to invest in helping other women, right? And everyone sort of wants to be in the movie industry, and I know it's like we see the same thing. Like investors are always like have terrible horror stories, or they like haven't done it but they really want to do it. And so taking this approach of like, hey, we're going to build something for professional athletes who have traditionally been burned and try to make like a meaningful business for them. I think that's really smart, and then sort of like also identifying projects that like fit to finding investors that fit your type of project.
Yeah, no, it's a really good idea, and it's it's like playing tennis with or without a net. You'd think that playing tennis without a net would be really easy. I mean, what can go wrong? But it's really very difficult. If you've got the structure, things work much better, even if there's a limitation to the structure. So I think those are good approaches. If any of you want to add something to the discussion so far, feel free. If not, perhaps it might make sense to open this up to some questions.
I have one thing to say. I really agree with what you were saying, is that by educating yourself, because you're going to be the one in the room talking, and if somebody else is doing the talking for you about the finances and stuff like that, it's a little suspect, because you as a producer are there to not only make sure that the film gets done, but to make sure that all the steps are being taken to get the person their money back. And so, that's, basically, I've read books that, be the last thing I ever thought that I would read, but about, loans and getting to know and learning how to pre-qualify, talking to the people that you need to talk to who will be responsible for that. And I think that that's truly the most important thing, and I applaud you for doing that. Doing a business plan is a lot of work.
It's also, if you think about some of the great, technology entrepreneurs, the really great ones, Zuckerberg, and Brin, people like that, and Gates, they started out very young. They obviously didn't have the business sophistication when they started off, because that's not what they did. They were technology people, and they've actually stuck with the company and continued to lead the company. And they're the ones who people believe in and have confidence in, not only on the technology level, but on the business level. So you have to be responsible for every part of what you do, not just selling a good story, but also making sure that the investor has confidence that you can take care of the money properly, that you're going to, get the money back to them, that you're going to exploit the property well. And if you can't speak to all of those things, you're not going to succeed.
And I think, find someone to work with who has a very different skill set that you have, that has the same sort of goals, and work together. It's like you said, you always have to be positive. It's so hard to get things off the ground. It's so helpful to have someone there who's sort of with you in the fight, but also like you said, and we often see producers come to us with projects and say, hey, you've never made a film. This seems like a great package. You need to go attach a producer who's made a lot of films that can sort of shepherd you through all the difficulties that come up in production. So, don't also feel like you have to do this by yourself. Find a partner, but make sure it's someone who's a different person with different skills and different experiences.
Yeah, because I'm involved in a project right now. And my partner is ready to take off on a sabbatical, leave filmmaking forever, and because she had such a horrible experience these last couple of days. And my thing is tough it up, girl. You gotta go through the motion, and then my part is to lift her up. She was doing that for me a couple of weeks ago. And so I think that's really some of the best advice, is to find someone who will go through the fray with you, because it's really going to war, and but a gentle war, where everyone comes out a winner. And the best thing is the first day when you get to make that picture, the first day of principal photography, and then when you're successful in the first day that you screen it, and your investor says, this was a great experience, I want to do more. That's really when you've done your job.
Yeah, I have a great business partner right now, and we have very complementary skills. So it's interesting you should mention that. She comes from the not-for-profit world, corporate world. She's on the board of New York Women in Film. She's out there meeting people constantly. I'm much more production focused. I come from a physical production background. Been producing film. So we came together in a very organic way, and we were friends for probably 8 years prior to that. And we spent a long time talking about, very openly, okay, what failed in your previous, partnerships. It's good to be super open about that, because I had 2 partnerships that didn't work out so great before with other producers, and so we spent a lot of time talking about what worked, what didn't work, how are we going to do it, how are we going to approach things, and that transparency between us has been invaluable.
Postmortems on failures are a good thing.
It's hard to do, but you got to do it.
But it truly, we're even going through that now with the situation we just had. What went wrong? Where did it go wrong? What
could we have done something different?
Right. What did we not hear? What did we not see? Red flag, red flag, red flag. And why did we choose not to see those? And I think that's part of the whole learning process. So.
Let's go to some questions. I think we've got mics on the side of the room. Is that how we're doing it? So I encourage you, if you have a question, to go up so we can hear you.
Hi, I just had a question about legal representation. In your experience, is it valuable for every single team member, meaning for the filmmaker, producer, obviously the investor, different investors who come in for equity or for financing, should everyone have a separate lawyer in terms of securing their interests, or is that sort of under the aegis of the producer?
Well, you might never get your project done. I mean, my husband's a lawyer. I love lawyers. They are good people, despite what people will say. I think the thing is that you have to be smart about your application of your resources, and what that is evaluating what point along the process do you need to bring in legal representation, and that comes down to me about alignment of where everyone is at. Are your investors aligned? Are you as producers aligned? And the thing is trying to minimize the amount of posturing. You get a $300,000 film, you don't get that much to go around, and everyone needs to get on the boat. I mean, I like to walk around with empty pockets because that's really what we're at. I don't have money for extra things. And so the thing is, unless you understand what this is, that we're having hot dogs for lunch and that's about it, you shouldn't be part of this team.
Well, as a producer, yeah, I basically try to get everything in shape first and just have those conversations. What are your expectations? This is what I think the return is going to be. You don't throw it all into your 100% and let your lawyer deal with it. Your lawyer works for you, first of all, and you should be aware of all the types of deal points in negotiating, and just get everything ballpark before you turn it over to legal.
Yeah, a term sheet is just, the thing's talk to an attorney. You can agree to terms, which then can be put in long-form contract. And that's what you should be doing, because then you get to suss out like who's real and who's not. And that really is, I think, the job about talking with people with money and equity. Are they for real? I mean, do they hit their deadlines? Do they deliver when they're supposed to?
20 of them might go away before one is actually going to live up to the terms.
Are they on the floor of a hospital with a brain tumor and they can't write the check? You're just like, seriously?
One thing
That actually did happen to her.
It did happen. It's a true story.
One thing that I think is interesting, because I do like to compare us to the startup world. When a tech entrepreneur is trying to go out for money and they're talking to angels and VCs, they never send term sheets. They always have the money send them the term sheets. And I think that's something that, what we're trying to do with Dogfish is to develop our own term sheets, our own operating agreements, to say these are the terms that we invest into. And therefore, we're the ones paying the money for all of that legal. We're the ones that are kind of doing the negotiating back and forth and taking on that cost. I think that's something that, I've seen it happen far too often where, the very, very under-budgeted legal line item then explodes not only to, much higher number than what was budgeted, but much higher than it actually even should have been, regardless of how low it was under-budgeted. I think investors really should be taking on a little bit of that kind of legal heartache.
But if you can't get them, the way to do that is to make legal representative part of your team, and that they get a reward. I mean, you get a flat out what they're going to get paid, but also that they can get a percentage of the back end. I mean, if you can convince them, that's the thing. But it's going to be someone who will throw in with you.
You have to know your own shit too. I mean, my lawyer calls me the pseudo lawyer, in a good way. He said it was in a good way. I don't know.
My husband hates that I'm practicing law with no degree.
And in your experience, do investors normally, equity investors or financing investors, do they normally actually bring a legal team to the table, and is that generally the strongest, or is that the most costly piece of the legal, budget line, or do producers also have to kind of work really hard on that, either by giving equity or actually putting up the money?
The
negotiations.
The investors usually bring in their own legal team, and that needs to be the case. There should definitely be a different legal team as far as who's investing into the project and who's representing the project. Otherwise, interests can be, completely misaligned or misinterpreted. A lot of liability in that structure of a single legal team. But majority of the time, because this is an industry where a lot of investors are inexperienced, they're not necessarily bringing someone who could be extremely familiar with entertainment law and entertainment investing, and that can be a problem at times. Which, again, with this world of investors bringing the term sheets to the table, it should be investors who have an understanding of the film industry and what they're really getting themselves into. I think majority of the investors I've worked with and I have relationships with, if I told them to give their term sheet, they would say, I have no idea what the terms are in a film, and that's a problem.
let's see whether we can get one or two quick questions in because we're running out of time.
Hi, I just wanted to address something that James said, and I'm trying to be gentle with this, but your designation of the Tangerine Entertainment's focus as being narrow, I take exception to that. I think the majority of the population are women and make up more than the majority of the film population, of the audience. Perhaps you could say that Carol's focus in the African American, that's 12% of the population, and yet Fruitvale is the best picture so far this year and will bring in an enormous audience. And I think this is important. If you look at the fight that's going on in Wikipedia right now with the ghettoization of there's writers, but then there's women writers, I think it's very important that we move past that, and that perhaps it's an underserved population. But from that population is coming the best work right now. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go back to the title of the panel, Why I Say Yes. I'm Amy Guggenheim. I am one of those women directors working on a martial arts film, not Kung Fu, but, and I'm talking directly with investors myself and putting together a package, and I'm wondering, particularly Amy, but also the other people on the panel, what do you look for besides a good story and a passionate project in terms of packaging and what needs to be brought to the table for you to say yes? I know it's different with every project, but just getting a sense of how you would nail that, put your finger on what those things would be.
Well, for me, for Tangerine and myself and Ann Hummel, it's a little bit elusive. It's sort of like a light bulb moment of how, like, I can see how this can be monetized. I see the audiences this can reach. It's like I see the entire trajectory of the film. In the range of projects we work with, which is everything from right now a Chilean film to a small, comedy in Austin, Texas. I just have to understand how the life of the project will play out and how I can foresee that the film will get to market, find an audience, and get some money back for the investors. And it's not numbers, it's not like I rarely deal with foreign sales. I mean, I have one or two bigger projects where those conversations obviously are taking place, but it's really, and there's a little bit of what I like to, I can't help it, but I'm not a fan of horror films, so it's unlikely that a horror genre film would get through on my plate. But I guess, yeah, it's just this.
And relevancy, I think that's important too, is that there are people who want to see your film. And you know that. And you know that because you've done the research. You've tracked other films that are similar. You just know that, I think that the great example with Fruitvale was that it was timely. It was like, they got really lucky too. They did a film that they knew was timely that became even more timely with all the news that was coming out and everything like that. That's why our film was about religion and, homosexuality. And we feel that that's sort of like, with all the legislation that's going on, it's going to be very timely because it's a story about a boy who wants to be religious and who is gay, and there should be no exclusion. And so we feel that, we knew that that was going to be relevant, even though a lot of people would say, this is not a story that should be told. And that's why we were able to convince the funders to invest. But you have to know that, you're not just making a project for yourself, and that there has to be some sort of social interest in what you're speaking to.
If you can come and tell us and show us how there is an audience for it or some sort of pre-awareness. We did a feature called Gaby, and the director had done a short called Gaby, and it had gone to 50 film festivals, had been in a bunch of compiled works, and had a huge following. And when he wanted to do the feature version of that, we were on board in the second.
And now the whole social media thing is important too. That you're out there, you're speaking about. That you are. I think the best thing about getting someone to say yes is because you produce the yes. and you produce the yes because of your knowledge, because of the content of what you're producing, your people's awareness of you as a filmmaker, that whatever you're doing, whether you're posting it up on the web at Little Moments or something like that, that when I look at that and I go to talk with somebody with money, I have the confidence to say, this person will make it to the end. And they've got a clear vision, they know what they're doing, and despite whatever's gonna happen along the way, I know that they can complete that. And then I have to give the assurances to the money. That
Let's
will
take
happen.
one last question from the right side.
Yeah, this is mostly intended for documentaries. So I typically see two types of projects: those that are the nonprofit, charitable types of development, and the other, which is mostly a equity-based investment capital. How do you guys recommend people go about making that decision? Obviously, you didn't do that early on.
I think it's a matter of if you want the film to make money or not. That's something. Dan Kogan had an article in IndieWire last week about gifting, which we were all sent, and it's a great article, and I think he makes a great point about the gifting relationship. Investors should gift their funds to support the arts, and the artist should gift the film as this is a piece of art that you helped create. The only issue with that is the purpose of forming an LLC is to create a business venture and to create revenue and to generate profit. So the idea of gifting makes sense if you're structuring a 501c3 or a B corporation. But if you're structuring an LLC, there still has to be fiduciary duties towards the investors. So it really is a matter of what are your priorities as the person managing this LLC. Is it making art or is it making commerce? And if it's a mix of both, then that's where you need to bring in additional people to your team to say, this is the creative team, they're going to ensure that we make the best film possible, and this is the business team, and they're going to make sure that we make the most profit possible.
So these days, you get combinations, by the way. Take a participant media. They're interested in making certain kinds of films. They have an agenda often, and yet those films are often financially very successful. I have a client who made a film in a not-for-profit corporation, and the film was a big success. He made all kinds of money. And he said, what do I do now? I've got all this money in a not-for-profit. We didn't think we were going to make any money. So, you can have unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I would just say, I would sort of work backwards from the content and like what's the audience, and then sort of say, hey, I think this could be really big and it is really meaningful, or this is a really small story that may have a small audience but still needs to be told.
Well, I think we've run out of time. I thank the panel members, and I thank you.
Thank you.